or sorry, or just different people in your organization that have something to do with finances. Make sure that you include them in this conversation, as well as your project people, right? So as many people can talk about what it realistically costs to keep the doors open at your organization, to keep the programs going at the rate that you'd like, is a good idea, because then you won't forget anything. So there is no, hopefully, problem of understating something. And also, in the same vein, please don't inflate the price of things, because that is something that is a quick turnoff to funders, because from where they sit, they get to review so many different types of budgets from different organizations that after a while, they have kind of developed how much something should cost. And if there are 10 organizations that are saying it'll cost X amount of money to put out this type of service or program, and then your organization is twice that, that is going to cause them to put up a red flag, and you don't want something like that to happen in that process. When I was with the Proteus Fund, my colleagues who were making these kinds of calls when they were reviewing the budgets of our grantees, that was one of the things that they were looking for, was, do, first of all the numbers add up, and then are the numbers realistic, right? And sometimes we would see that people had understated their needs because they felt like that meant they would be better, like they would increase their chances of getting a grant. And so we would have to call them and tell them, like, that is actually not a good strategy, because perhaps it looks cost effective. We give you that grant, you actually don't have the money to be able to give the deliverables you promised on the grant, and like, no one wins in that situation. So to the second point, do not make up figures, get the real costs. So if you don't know, it's always good to call somebody, maybe a partnering organization, a similarly situated organization, to ask, like, I'm developing this, I need some guidance, would you be willing to help me? And also, like, as I stated before, you have to be thorough. If you forget any type of cost and you've submitted a proposal to the funder, there is no, oh, I'm sorry, can I get my proposal back and amend it? Most funders won't let you do that. And if a grant is actually awarded, then if a cost was not put into the budget, your organization unfortunately will have to absorb it, right? And most of us are not in a position where that is something that they would be able to do. And as always, follow the grant maker's directions. And if you don't understand what the grant maker is asking, ask them questions, right? Budgets are very particular, and every funder has their own way of specifying what type of costs can be included and what should not be included. And those are things that you should really be paying attention to as you are putting a budget together for a particular funder. So I would say, like, listen to any webinars they're putting together, ask questions then, read the request for proposal thoroughly, and also any and all grant guidelines that are available for the particular opportunity that you're applying for. And then lastly, triple check your math, right? So even if you have all the numbers in right, but you don't add them up correctly, you can be understating your costs, you can be overstating your costs, and that can come back later to haunt you. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. So these are the typically kind of like your two budget costs. So they're the direct costs and then indirect costs. And direct costs are usually associated with the activities that go along with your project or program, right? And so they're very specific to what you need to be able to bring about the program, the particular project, or the service that you provide. And then indirect costs are usually known as our overheads or the admin costs that are shared. So to it's hard to put like in a line item because you may have a program director whose direct cost, like their salary, goes under that budget, but that program director may be talking to your executive director, right? And so to capture kind of like the share of your executive director's input into that program is where the indirect costs kind of come in. Or the entire office has rent, right? The entire office has internet. So you can kind of parse those things out line item wise, but it is more difficult. It's easier to kind of have an indirect cost that you've come up with organizationally that you're able to put into your budgets for the various proposals that you're going to be writing. And I'm going to say one thing with indirect costs, though, you have to be careful because not all funders actually will cover indirect costs. So, as I mentioned earlier, be very vigilant about reading what is going to be covered within the funding opportunity that you're applying for. And even when some let you include indirect costs, sometimes there is a cap. And I think I've seen the range from like 15% to 25%. Yeah. So basically, like, there's also this conversation that is being had with foundations. So there was a time that foundations actually gave mostly general operating funds, and I think that was before I became a fundraiser because I do not have that recollection. Then there was some type of partnership with McKinsey and 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 et al, right? And they tried to do what McKinsey always tries to do is try to make philanthropy more cost effective, right? Like, what are the pitfalls? What are the weaknesses? What are best practices and what have you? And after that type of partnership, the strategy for philanthropy shifted, and it was like, we shouldn't be just supporting organizations, we should be supporting particular programs which evolved into particular strategies. And fast forward to today, and that's basically what's happened, that funders, for the most part, thought it was better to invest in programmatic support rather than organizational support, right? But I think they've had to learn the hard way that a program can be outfitted in the most like amazing way, but if the organization isn't there to run the program, then that's a problem, right? And so slowly it's shifting back towards general operating support. However, most funders aren't there, and it's through the relationships that we maintain with our funders that helps them get to that position. So I just wanted to mention that yes, the way that most funders show up is programmatic support, but it's also changing, and a lot of them are understanding that it's the organizations that need funding, and it's best to let the organizations decide how they're going to use that funding to fund the particular programs, projects, service projects that they have. and always, these are always great ways to actually engage with your program officer and talk to them about the particularities in your particular organization, or even perhaps in the field that you're part of largely. Next slide, please. Ooh, I don't know why that's coming up yellow. All right. When you get your slides, it will be blue and it's linked, it's hyperlinked. And so these are some of the sample grant budgets that I saw that were really helpful. And there are so many more. You can definitely Google a sample grant budget and you will have a lot to choose from. So like I said, it was going to be a very quick and dirty kind of introduction to budgets. Wanted to cover kind of like what a budget is, what it looks like, but I wasn't going to necessarily do a deep dive unless there are like questions, and then we can kind of pause and we can talk more about something if someone had a particular question.
I have one question,
Mhm.
Celine. So is it best practice kind of to include in kind,
Oh,
like
yes.
say if we have volunteers running all of our programs, so just the value of their time or in-kind donations that come in for stuff, is that included on the budget or not?
That's a great question. Thank you for actually raising that. Yes, in-kind donations are important because without those volunteers, you wouldn't be able to achieve the program at the level that you're currently running it at, right? And the funder actually needs to see that you're applying for funds to make sure that the program keeps doing what it's supposed to do, but also that you require funding so that you can maybe hire another staff person and not have to consistently or constantly just rely on volunteers, right? Or be able to pay the volunteers. I think we have like the wrong priorities, even in the nonprofit area. Like we're always fighting for equity and inclusion, but in some of our practices, we actually sacrifice our own equity and inclusion in these kinds of areas, right? Because people who are passionate and dedicated do this, and should there be a price tag associated with it? Yes, because everyone has bills to pay, everyone still has to live in the world, and just because I'm passionate about eradicating something doesn't mean it should be used against me, right? And so short answer, yes. Please include in-kind donations or expenses in budgets.
So a follow-up question that came in from Shatoya is, how do you calculate that time?
That's a great question. I would say it depends on what type of work the volunteer is doing, right? When I was at the Smithsonian, the way that we calculated that was basically like that volunteer has the qualifications of this staff person. And so whatever that staff person's salary, like however that was calculated, was how we calculated the same for the number of hours that person was contributing towards a particular project. And I'm sure there are guides online. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to find a few, and at least one, if not a couple, and I will attach it to the resources as follow-up to the workshop.
Thank you.
All right. Next slide, please. You're welcome. All right. So what is a logic? How many people have drafted logic models or know what a logic model is? Okay, I see one hand. Two. Okay. All right. Um, so before I introduce the logic model, what I'm going to share is it usually terrifies most people. Like, I know that amongst all my colleagues who are fundraisers or grant writers, they hate they hate writing, drafting a logic model. Whenever we look at grant requirements or like proposal requirements and we've seen logic models, those are the ones that we're like, hopefully we can find someone who actually wants to give us money in that same category, but does not want a logic model. And in the beginning, when I was actually starting out writing, um, uh, that's what a lot of the people who I was working with like had that attitude, and I actually just kind of adopted it because like they were so scared of logic models that that fear transferred to me. Um, but now that I've written logic models, I'm not afraid of them. I just still feel like they're tedious, so I try to still stay away from them. However, you may be different and you may love logic models, but they are very impactful actually, and they are a really great way of showing people in a visual way the story of your program, right? And so if you think about the various components that go into a proposal, like there's the narrative part, there's the budget, and then there's the logic model. There's a little bit of everything for different people in the way that they actually um, take in and process information, right? I am stronger with narrative, so I excel in that part of the proposal. Even though I like visuals, logic model is not my strength, and so I kind of like struggle in that area. But there are people on teams that when they just see the logic model, they know exactly what the program or the organization is about, and they don't even have to read the proposal, right? And so just think of these different elements of a proposal as a way to just reiterate to different types of people what you are trying to say that you're trying to accomplish in a given program or an organization without knowing who the reviewer of your proposal is going to be, right? And so basically, logic models are best described as a roadmap to your programmatic success. Um, Logic models follow if this, then that type of method. If you can imagine, like now when we hop into our car and drive to a destination, it used to be like we looked at maps, right? But now digitally, it's the GPS. You wouldn't drive to a new place without programming your address into a GPS. And basically that's what the logic model is. You're telling the person, hey, this is where you are now. This is where we want to be. And this is how I'm going to take you down the road to take you to where we feel the impact is going to be. I think I did a really bad job of that analogy, but it is what it is, and I'm going to stand by it. Any questions before we leave this slide? What I tried to do with this little this logo, not logo, this picture was to kind of show you the progression of a logic model. And thank you, Dina, for laughing. I appreciate that. You can see that there are essentially five steps, right? The first is your resources inputs. The second is activities. And these first two are called kind of your planned work. And then the last three are grouped into your intended results. So that's the outputs, the outcomes, and then finally your impact. Okay, next slide, please. So I think if you've seen logic models, that's basically the kind of logic model nightmare. I mean, logic model example that comes into people's heads, right? Like these colorful charts with arrows, and it shows a lot of movement, and it looks so cool until you have to do it. Um, yeah. Sorry, I got lost in one of them thinking about a time where I had to do this before. So I wanted to put that out there to say, like, they can be as complex as this or even more complex. Like, there are actually three different types of logic models. And one is like a theory of change, and there is like a V in the middle of that diagram, and there's like these circles, and we're not going to cover that because we don't need to. And usually there is no requirement for proposals to have such a challenging logic model in a part of the package. So I'm going to keep it very simple, and that is the logic model that we'll do together in a few slides. Next slide, please. All right. So as I stated, there are 5 steps. The first 2 are your planned work, which are the inputs and activities. So basically, the planned work describes the resources you think you need to implement your program and what you intend to do. So inputs or resources are the resources needed to implement the program. So basically that includes, the human power, financial resources, organizational resources, community resources. And then activities are what the program does with those resources, with those inputs, right? So the processes, the tools, the events, technology, actions that are intentional part of the program implementation. So inputs are your program investments, what you're investing, and activities are basically what you're going to do with those investments. Next slide, please. All right. And so the intended results were the three remaining steps, right? The outputs, the outcomes, and then the impact. And so intended results include basically the results of your program, right? So outputs are the direct products of your activities. They may include types, levels, and targets of services to be delivered by the program. And then the outcomes are the specific changes in program participants' behavior, knowledge, skills, status, and level of functioning. So I think it's important to understand the difference between outputs and outcomes, because that is where I think a lot of people start getting lost, right? So outputs are the direct products of your activities. So how will you know that the planned activities happened? So those are quantifiable. Outcomes are the benefits or the changes we are expecting because of those outputs. So yeah, so it's the change that we are seeking by doing the work that we are doing. And outcomes can be of 3 different types. There's short-term outcomes, there are midterm outcomes, and then long-term outcomes. And usually, like, short-term could be done in the grant period, because usually grant periods are a year, though foundations are trying to do more multi-year funding. So short term, if you have a multi-year grant, your short term may be maybe a few months, right? Like 3 to 6 months or 6 to 9 months or something, depending on how your program has been divided within the grant period. Midterm, I would say, would be more achievable in I guess maybe 4 to 6 years. And long-term type of effects are not expected to be completed within a grant period. Usually they're about 7 to 10 years. And I see Amber's question. Let me pull it up. Are these hypothetical? What if the grant is for a new concept? Usually this is kind of like a general rule of thumb. Like, I don't think it needs to be, like, I don't think it's like etched in stone in any way, but generally, short-term goals should be able to be delivered within the grant period. And midterm and long-term, depending on what it is, what type of change you're proposing as the impact, those I think can be kind of case by case basis, depending on your field, your sector, the type of funder that you're having that conversation with. And if it's a totally new concept, as you mentioned, that you are trying to gain funding for, I'm sure there are still things that you can achieve in the short term, right? But let's say if there aren't, then I think it's okay to have like midterm outcomes and long-term outcomes. Yes, so short-term, midterm, and long-terms are examples of outcomes. That's basically like, as we look at kind of like the groupings of the logic model, you'll kind of see that. Actually, I don't know if I have it in the template that we're going to look at. I can't remember, but sometimes when a logic model is asked by a funder, they usually also have guidelines as to what kind of things they want to see in that logic model. So I'll share that when I was at Proteus, we were applying to Unbound Philanthropy, and they have a very, like, they like to say their application, their proposal is not that wordy, which is true. But that in itself is a challenge, right? Like, okay, fine, I'm not writing a 15-page proposal, but in 5 pages I have to say what I could have said in 15 pages. So that's a different challenge. And they don't ask for a logic model, but all their questions are basically what we just went over, right? Like, they want to see outputs and then they want to see outcomes. And for everything they wanted a short term, a midterm, and a long term. And sometimes we really didn't have a midterm. And so where it asks for a midterm, we just basically kind of explained how this particular output would not have a midterm outcome, because it's very kind of like, this is what's going to happen within the grant period, and this is how it's moving it towards the long-term outcome. So again, unfortunately, a lot of these things can be case by case and funder by funder. And then ultimately the impact is the fundamental change that is occurring in the organizations or the communities or the systems that we're trying to affect change in. Next slide, please. All right, so I kind of want us to have perhaps maybe should we pause now for Maghrib prayer?
Time is it? Yeah, let's pause right now.
10:45.
It's a good time.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think? How much, how are you doing on time? How long should the break be? 10 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, 10 minutes is fine.
Okay, cool. So it is 7:46. We will be back at 7:56.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec.
All right. Just let me know when I should start back up. I know it's 7:56, but not sure if everyone is back.
Can you just give a thumbs up or a heart or some reaction if you're back?
Yay. So I will proceed. All right. So I wanted to kind of reiterate the difference between outputs and outcomes because it can be confusing, especially when you are kind of um, kind of in the thick of things and trying to put it together. So just again, briefly, outputs are the direct products of a program's activities or services. Um, they're often expressed numerically, so quantifiable. So for example, it's the number attending workshops or the number of people receiving services. So just remember, outputs are usually quantifiable. Next slide. And outcomes are usually the change or the benefit, right? And so they're going to be a bit more narrative in form. So outputs are numerical, quantifiable, and outcomes are going to be more of your smart wording, right? So changes resulting from a program's activities or services, quantify changes in knowledge, attitude, behavior, or condition. So examples are hopefully, an increase in knowledge of healthy choices, an increase in adoption of healthy practices, an increase in food security. So you are reflecting the change that resulted from the activities of the outputs, right? Um, so not only are they descriptive, yes, they are descriptive in the sense that like quantifying versus description, but remember that it's the actual change that is happening that is resulting from the program's activities and services. Um, Yes, that's true. It could be numerical. I mean, I was trying to give like an easy kind of way to sort of remember the distinction. So it's like usually outputs are the number of things you're doing or the number of people you're reaching, right? Um, and the outcomes is the actual change or the benefit that happened to the people that you were engaging with previously in outputs. So it'll be hopefully the increase in something, right? Next slide, please. All right. I hope this is kind of visible for you to read, but basically, when I was introducing logic model, it was also kind of it's seen as like if-then statements to help you figure out how to plug in the various steps. So like I mentioned before, it's like the 5 steps. It starts from inputs, goes to activities, outputs, outcomes, and then impact. It's a little small for me right now because of the way that I'm kind of managing the presentation and my notes. I don't think I need to read it, but I included this in here so that it's helpful for you as you are drafting the logic model. I think maybe I can read it. Um, so for resources, it says certain resources are needed to operate your program, right? And so those resources, those inputs, so like the human power, the finances, those kinds of things will go under your inputs. The activities are if you have access to them, meaning activities, then you can use them to accomplish your planned activities. Then outputs is if you accomplish your planned activities, then you will hopefully deliver the amount of product and or service that you intended. Outcomes. If you accomplish your planned activities to the extent you intended, then your participants will benefit in certain ways. And then lastly, impact. If these benefits to participants are achieved, then certain changes in organizations, communities, or a system might be expected to occur. And towards the end, I've included 2 links to resources for the logic model. One is the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's kind of workbook around logic models. And I took this as a screenshot from one of the worksheets that they have. And you can kind of like dive deeper through that workbook, because it's like logic models take some time to get used to with the different types of distinctions they have, and just like the kind of like the practicing that you need to do to kind of get into the frame of mind to be able to do this in a way that unfortunately we don't have the time for in our time together tonight. Let me just check the chat. Yes. You can kind of say the outcome lines like aligns with the mission and the impact with your vision, because impact is not necessarily so there are different types of impacts, right? Like you can have an impact that is kind of short term, like immediate, and then there are some impacts that will happen sometime in the future. Exactly. So it's so I'm gonna say it's kind of like both of those things, if that makes any sense. Next slide, please. All right, so I also found this somewhere on the interwebs. And it's just a different way of kind of seeing the same thing that we just reviewed in the previous picture. So it's like use these resources for these activities to produce these outputs so the target audience can change their ways, which leads to these outcomes leading to these results. So sometimes we need to be inspired in a different format. So I was like, let me include both of these because I'm not sure like what may resonate with you more so than one model than the other. So it's just basically saying everything that I've laid out before, right? But in a very hopefully like more linear way for you to be able to process how the different buckets kind of align with each other, and then what you need to put under those columns. Next slide, please. So I tried to do a logic model for this particular workshop that we're doing together. So I started off with our need. And so our need is to learn about logic models, right? The target population are the participants, the lovely participants that are here tonight. And my goal is so that you all understand how logic models are constructed and used, right? So our inputs are participants, all of you. So that's the training session. The activities is to attend this training session. The outputs are the notes and learnings based on attending this presentation. And then the outcomes are the increased understanding of logic models, the use in proposals, grants, and program development. Let's see, is there a specific length or wordiness for the logic model? Nope. It's honestly, so it just depends on how the funder is asking you to construct the logic model. And I'll show you, it comes up in a few slides further down. But basically, they're columns, or sometimes what they do is ask you to maybe do a logic model the way that it is on your screen right now. So you may have to get into Canva or Word document and put boxes and arrows and things like that. But whenever there's a request by a funder to put a logic model together, there are specific instructions as to how to do it. So some people, like I said, Unbound Philanthropy asks for a logic model without asking for a logic model. They just do it in their prompts in the proposal. And when you see, like, they basically say, like, what are the inputs? What are the activities? What are the outputs? What are the outcomes? And what impact are you hoping for? Nowhere in their proposal does it say we require a logic model. Those are questions in the prompts. And when I saw that, I was like, they're asking for a logic model. But we had put a logic model together already, so it was easy for me to just take it out of the different columns and put it down in paragraph form the way that they wanted. Let's see. How come the trainer knowledge PPT isn't in the output? That's true. See, I'm not a whiz at logic models still, even though I've been doing this for a while. And I did this really fast. So I didn't do a great job of putting this together, but I kind of wanted you to kind of see how the inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes like work with each other in a very like simple way. Next slide, please. All right, so this we can kind of do together, and then the next exercise. So there are two exercises in this. This one we can do together as a group, and then the next one is going to be particular to help you start to draft a logic model for your particular need in your organization, right? So this one is a wildlife conservation program. It is designed to create healthy, productive, and sustainable ecosystems for the benefit of wildlife in areas of need. So what might this program's logic model look like, right? And so far we've seen like those really cute boxes, but that's not where I'm going to go with this. If we can do the next slide. Yeah. So most times this is what a funder is looking for, right? Either they will provide this type of template as part of their proposal package, or just show it to you for you to kind of duplicate in Word somehow. And like it's nothing fancy. It's just columns with the headings that we've been talking about: inputs, activities, outputs, and the different types of outcomes. And here you will see that the outcomes is differentiated between the short term, the medium term or midterm, and then the long term. And when you get this as your materials, you'll be able to see it a bit better. I don't know how big your screen is. For me, it's a little small. So basically, again, inputs are what we are investing. So what do we put into the program, right? Funding, it's our staff. Here, they added 200 AmeriCorps members, 200 non-AmeriCorps volunteers, member training and research. For activities, what is it that we do? Make trails accessible for people with physical disabilities, conduct habitat development projects, conduct invasive species removal. Outputs, direct products from program activities. So installed ramps and handrails on X miles of trail, planted native trees and other native species on X sites, and removal of invasive plant species on X sites. I don't need to read all of them, but basically I wanted to share in this in the group setting that this is usually how a logic model will look as you're putting it together for a funder. If we go to the next slide. So this is where I'm asking you to basically take what we've just covered and start drafting a logic model for your own needs at your organization. So it's as simple as making those columns. So you'll have an inputs column, an activities column, an outputs column, and then you can make your outcomes column like the broadest, and that's divided into short, intermediate, midterm, whatever, however you want to phrase that, and long term. Yeah. And so maybe we can take, do you think 5 minutes is not enough time? Maybe 5 minutes to start like putting something together? Okay, let's take 5 minutes to see if like how you feel about putting a logic model together based on your organizational needs. And you can do it for the entire organization if you want, or you can pick a particular program that you are trying to fundraise for. Sadav, can I ask you to kind of advance the slides, 2 slides?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was managed.
Yeah. So these are like, as you are kind of writing out the different components of the logic model, these are some of the questions to consider to help you fill out the columns. Troy has asked a question about in the short term, it says, what changes in knowledge, skills, and or attitudes do you expect from your program? So that just depends on the type of program you're talking about, right? So attitudes could be, let's say, so like a perception around something. So like maybe healthy eating. You're trying to get people to be uh, better with the choices that they're making at the grocery store, right? But it also starts with shifting their perception or an attitude around eating to begin with. And so the short term could be, changing like perhaps a meat lover's uh, meat lovers perception or attitude about adding more vegetables to their diet, right? Do people still need more time? So how did they switch to outcomes? So the out.
I
Mhm.
started out with, outputs, the number of people who were attending the
Mhm.
program and the increase of people in that we would see like in the clinic.
Mhm.
And then somehow it switched to the number of people receiving diagnostic and treatment, and then it switched to knowledge of preventive care and maintenance. And so I think I kind of got confused with the knowledge and the number, and yeah.
So I think so whenever there's a change in behavior or a benefit to the people that you are providing the program or service to, most likely that's an outcome,
Okay.
right? Because they are the recipient of change or a benefit or whatever it is that like the activity was trying to get them to do. And that's what ended up happening.
Got it. So I can basically have more outcomes than outputs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There isn't necessarily like you don't have to have like, let's say you have 3 inputs. You can have 5 activities and you can
Mhm.
have 3 outputs, right? Like there isn't a ratio between the columns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Thank
you can
you.
you're welcome. You can have as many or as little, as long as that is exactly what you want to be doing,
Mhm.
you are doing, right?
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
once I started, I saw why you said if for your whole organization or a specific activity. Because then when I started thinking about all the things the organization does, then it became super long, and
Yeah.
now I understand why you said that.
I mean, you can definitely do a logic model for your entire organization, but that's going to be an intense logic model.
Yeah.
All right, how are people doing? Do people need more time, or should we just kind of like just start talking about how did that feel? Did your brain kind of feel like it did some type of gymnastics? Did it feel uncomfortable? Or perhaps it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Where have logic models been my whole life?
It started off like, oh, okay, I understand what I'm doing. And then as I started putting everything down, I was like, wait, I think this is the outcome. No, wait, I think this is the input. Oh, wait, I forgot this. So yeah, it was more of, I thought I had everything, but having to like keep going back, like, and putting them in the right box. And then after a while, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
Well, I'm going to say that is very normal. Like logic models are, they look really cute and easy and simple, but they're actually another way of putting the proposal together, but in this format and on one page, right? And so that's a tall feat. What I will stress again is whenever you are getting ready to write your grant proposal, build in a lot of time to be able to actually focus on the different types of things that funders are asking to be part of the proposal, right? And so the logic model will take time. And the logic model also probably needs input from other people in the organization. So even if you start drafting the logic model, I would pull people in to help you, right? Because maybe you feel like you've got all the inputs covered, and somebody else at the organization will look at it and be like, well, you forgot this. What about this? You know, what about that? So I don't want anybody to feel bad because like within 5 minutes, you cannot have a complete logic model of your entire organization or even like your program. So I wanted to get all of you to kind of like start thinking about how you can talk about the various programs or services that your organization offers in this type of setting. And the more you kind of do this activity, it will actually even help you when you are doing the narrative, right? It will really summarize in a very succinct manner what you are actually doing, with what, for whom, and why, right? Like all of those things are addressed in the logic model.
Would
Some
you
people-
would you suggest doing one box at each time, or just going like, if you have one input, just finish that one input and the activities and outputs all at one time, or just go through all inputs, all outputs, all outcomes? Like, what's your opinion of the easiest way, if there is an easier way, so that you're not like pulling out your hair?
This is why I got my hair cut really short. I don't have to pull out as much. No, just kidding. But not really. My suggestion would be like, I feel like everyone operates differently, right? So whatever feels right, I'm going to say is right for you.
Okay.
I've done it various ways where when I feel very confident of what it is we're doing in a program, like I really know that program inside out, I'm able to kind of go column by column and it's done, right? And other times my program colleagues aren't the best with communicating what it is they're actually doing, or that program is not really that much of an interest to me. So I haven't spent the time to really like think about that program. So sometimes I'll just start with like, okay, I understand those are the inputs. And I think, yeah, that makes sense for those are the activities I remember, outputs, outcomes, so on. So it kind of, I fill out the columns in that type of way. So I think it's the law school answer of it just depends. It depends on how familiar you are with the different programs that you're writing the logic model for, and also like how you kind of organize information in your head.
Okay, thanks.
You're
Do
welcome.
you ever go backwards, like start from the end and move forward?
So there is another theory, which I did not include in this, but
Okay.
there is a theory that some people actually start from the impact and then go backwards. There is no right or wrong way of doing this. It's just how we organize information, right? Like even when you look at logic models, it's the information that's in your grant proposal, but it's in a different format.
Thank you.
Mhm. You're welcome. All right, anybody else want to share their feelings? Did you punch the screen? Did you want to punch my face?
I think when doing the logic model, it makes you really see like the big picture of why you're doing all these activities, especially if it's you're in your organization doing this tedious work every day, then it makes you see like, well, yeah, you're doing it, but it's doing this big long-term impact on these women or this or that. So it's
Mhm.
a good way to see a big picture.
That's a good point. Thank you. All right. Well, if there are no other comments or questions, we can move to the next slide. And I can't believe I've gone through this presentation this quick, and logic models are much more complicated than the other two subject areas that we've addressed previously. So I kind of wanted to give a few more tips on when you're drafting your own logic model. Just focus on the cause and effect relationship. So like the if then type of statements, right? That will help you kind of think along the lines of how to write out the different components that are needed for the different columns. It's a visual map, right? So it's a visual link that takes the reviewer, the reader of your proposal through the steps of your work. So it's creating a path to you solving the problem or answering the questions. And I cannot stress this one enough. Please keep it simple. Like even like all of the proposal, just keep it simple. There is absolutely no reason to use big words, try to impress people through that type of angle. You are experts in what you do. Step into that power, respect your expertise, and then just communicate that in the format that the funders have asked you to do, right? So clarity over confusion. There's absolutely no reason to be using flowery language, language that like postgrads would understand. Like actually the best way to know if you've written something that is compelling is to get like a fifth grader to read it. if a fifth grader can understand what you wrote, that means like most people will understand what you're trying to communicate with them. At the Smithsonian, I remember when we were working at the Beyond Bollywood exhibition, the curator, when she was writing the text for the different, I'm forgetting now what they're called, but like basically the text of the exhibition that would be up on the walls. That was one of the things that she was constantly getting back, was that the language was just too high. It was too complicated. It was too, for lack of a better term, like elitist and educated. And they were like, you have to keep it simple, because the Smithsonian has so many different types of people that, visit. And a fifth grader, a third grader, and a 9-year-old, all of them need to be able to read the same text and walk away with the same type of information, right? And so it's not as broad when it comes to people who are reviewing your grant proposals, but there is a lot of diversity in the people that will be reading your proposals, will be reading your pitches, will be listening to you as you pitch, right? And so this advice is not just limited to the logic models. It's everything that you are using to communicate why what you do is so important and why it needs to be supported. So here, the logic model is kind of like a stripped version of your proposal. So you don't have to put like really big details in here. Just be very precise about what the different columns are asking you about. And remember that like the fleshed out details are in the narrative in the proposal. Again, try to make it visually pleasing, but it doesn't necessarily need to be an artwork. You don't need to go overboard with like, the different kinds of colors and all of this, unless the funder is actually asking you for it. And as it says, like align information horizontally where possible. So that's just about like the flow, helping the leader, not the leader, the reader lead as they're reading from left to right, or if they even read from right to left, if they're one of the people who think that like they want to start with the impact and then go backwards. Any questions? So next slide. And these are the two resources that I had mentioned earlier. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation actually has done an amazing job of putting together logic model guides and resources. And the biggest reason they've done that is because all of their proposals have an ask for a logic model. And so if you're ever going to be applying for a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, know that you're going to be writing a logic model. So because they asked for it and they saw that people were struggling so much, they have drafted a lot of materials and resources to help folks with the ask that they've put out there. And then the Innovation Network Logic Model Workbook was also really nice. I just kind of reviewed it before I was putting this presentation together. And there's lots of other ones out there, but I feel like the Kellogg Foundation's is one of the best ones that you can kind of use to take a even deeper dive into logic models. Next slide. So if there aren't any questions specific to the budget or logic models, I kind of wanted to shift our gears again back to these being components of your bigger grant proposal, right? And so we've now kind of worked towards or worked through, what do you do when you get the inkling that we should fundraise, we need to get a grant in here. So all the things like, how do you research a funder? How do you reach out to them? How do you differentiate between the different types of foundations, the different types of grants that are available, to actually sitting down and writing a grant proposal, the various components that are within a grant proposal. We've taken certain dives into particular components. And now that you've put your proposal together, you've sent it off, and the funder has gotten back to you, and yay, good news, you've been awarded the grant. So what are kind of the next steps? And I feel like a lot of workshops that I've gone to don't really talk about the cultivation and stewardship of the relationships that we start when we are doing the grant proposals, right? So we feel like once we've put the proposal together, once we've sent it, that's it. I'm only going to have some type of relationship with the funder when I hear back a positive answer. So yes, definitely, you should want to make sure that that relationship continues. So once you have gotten your acceptance email or letter or whatever way that the foundation or funder has let you know that you've been awarded the grant, you should definitely thank the funder. And now you've moved that funding relationship out of cultivation into stewardship. And stewardship basically means that you are making sure that the funder is happy. And so how is the funder happy? The funder is happy by being plugged into things that you are doing that you said you would be doing if you were awarded the grant, right? So it's basically keeping them engaged and informed in how the grant is progressing. There are some built-ins. So some funders will actually ask for reporting. There are annual reports. Sometimes there are like the Democracy Fund folks, our grants with them, I think were for, no, it was a year and a half, I think. And so they asked for quarterly reports. So just being aware that once you've gotten the green light, you've gotten the grant, please review the grant letter, because in it, it will tell you exactly how the funder wants to know of the progress, basically. So there'll be two things that are really important to look at, which is the narrative report, how many and when are they all due? And the second is the kind of like the financial report. So the budget you had submitted, and now what they want to figure out is, did you spend the money the way that you said you were going to spend the money? And so put all of those dates in your calendar. And then I always give myself a month ahead of the deadline to start working on finishing up those reports, the narrative and the budget, because it'll give you that time to bring in the people that will help you draft those reports. Another great way to be stewarding that relationship is finding appropriate ways to recognize and publicize the gift. So if you have a website and the funder is okay with you sharing that, they have awarded you a grant, that's one of the best ways to kind of like put your partners or like supporters, put their logo on your webpage. At the Smithsonian, we used to put it on our Facebook, thanking them. And then we would tag them. We would also tweet it out. Now we have Instagram and, TikTok and all of that. So if you are on social media, you have that presence. Oftentimes the grant letter will actually even tell you what type of what type of media is allowed in sharing the awarding of the grant to you. And if it's not in there, I would double check with them before putting it out on social media. Another thing that is equally important is to confirm when you will receive the check, what documentation you will need to sign, and how they prefer to hear from you. So how they prefer to hear from you is basically the reporting, if it's not outlined in the grant letter. Definitely ask if it's not in the grant letter how you're going to be paid. Ask them how they're going to pay you. I will tell you right now, we have a foundation that told us at the end of last year that we were getting a $500,000 grant. By January, they changed their minds and said they're only going to give us $450,000 now. We have reached out to them on multiple occasions. Now we're almost in April, and we've been told that we've been awarded the grant, but there has been no grant letter and they haven't sent a check. So I hope this doesn't happen to any of you, but just know that there are funders who sometimes do this, and then you have to bug the heck out of them to get your funding. I mean, we've been approved. Like they've congratulated us, but they have not given us the monies. And as soon as you get that grant, you have to start planning for after that grant period, right? Because we're pushing our funders to give multi-year grants, but not everyone is doing that. So start planning for the renewal of the grant as soon as you get your check for the current grant period's award. How do we handle that? Thankfully, because we're a big organization, we're not, though that may be changing in a few. For my particular team, we actually do need the funds sooner than later. When something like this happens, this is where relationships matter, right? Like you should be able to pick up the phone and tell the program officer how dire it is for them to send the check. And like I said, like thankfully, because I'm part of a bigger organization, we're not hurting. And this could also be one of the reasons why they're taking their sweet old time, right? But it's not professional and it's not something that is best practice, but it does happen. And I did want to share that with you so that if God forbid it happens, you should be on top of it, and it is within your right to ask them that you've stated that we've gotten this award, but you still haven't paid. Yes, I would not publicize it until you have the funds in your bank account. About the planning, I'm guessing you're saying about the renewal. I don't think you need to necessarily wait until after you receive the check. So one of the things that I was doing at Proteus was I had come up with a template of the type of proposals that I wanted, like we were comfortable writing, and that our funders had become very used to seeing from us. And so basically, once it was renewed, I would go into the application or the proposal that I had submitted for that grant year. I would go in and take out the things I knew that we would be changing for a renewal. And so once we were coming back to the renewal conversation, I would have a bare bones template to start working from, so that I wouldn't have to kind of like start from scratch. So that's what I mean about start planning for after the grant period. And also think about, like, you know, you started this relationship with this funder, you've brought them on this journey. How do you want to engage them in a renewal for the grant? So like start thinking about those things. Any other questions? Okay, let me see. How do you adjust when you told one amount and that changes? Won't it affect your program or organization? So the thing is, hopefully in the budget exercise, you were as precise about the real costs and what you needed, right? But of course, there are always wrenches that life throws at us. Take, for instance, COVID, right? Like, there is no amount of planning that could have predicted a pandemic. And a lot of organizations have suffered because that was not something that anybody was considering as a financial challenge that could come up, right? And so funders know that unexpected things can always happen. And this is where the whole relationship building comes into play, right? It's not a transactional relationship that you're trying to cultivate with your funders. You're really, like, they're really buying into what it is you're doing, and they're committed to you as an organization because you are providing the type of impact that they're interested in bringing about. So I would say that if changes are starting to happen, let's say you have staff changes, or you have, like, policy comes into effect and it makes it worse, or maybe it improves the situation. You hadn't thought that, like, policy would happen so fast or something. You pick up the phone and you start talking to your program officer. Yeah, I mean, because it's a relationship and it's with a person and it's not transactional, people are more understanding than perhaps they're given credit for.
Actually, the question I meant for when you said that you were promised $500,000 and you were actually gonna get 450 instead. Like, what do you do about that? It's nothing you can do, I'm assuming, but why do you adjust? Or
Exactly. There's nothing, unfortunately, you can do. So what's frustrating for me on that relationship is that I am not one of the leading people in that relationship. And unfortunately, the people that are not assertive in kind of like standing up for our organization, unfortunately, in conversations. So they kind of say, excuse me, oh, well, okay, we understand, right? I don't take those types of positions. I'm not saying I'm rude or disrespectful, but I do remind people of the power dynamics that exist, and that $50,000 is not small change, right? Like $50,000 is a lot of money. And maybe to Ashoka as an organization, $50,000 is a drop in the bucket because we have a $45 million budget as an organization that is global. The particular funding is going to teams that have $1 million budget. So $50,000 taking away is not a smart move, right? So I would have tried to renegotiate and ask them to reconsider their gift. But my colleagues that are on that team are also on teams that are more well-resourced than other teams that are actually getting the funding. So I only learned of this much later in the conversation. And at that point, it's like kind of, you can't really do anything about it, unfortunately. All right. One more slide to go. Next slide, please. All right. So unfortunately, there are times where you've given the best effort, you've had the most amazing conversations with program officers, and when they get back to you, your proposal has been rejected. And it's okay to cry a little. I've done that in the past. But one of the things that I've always done is I always still thank the funder for considering us and for the opportunity to apply. Because you don't want to have any hard feelings with people, right? There are program officers who are your ride or die, but unfortunately there are still boards and trustees at foundations that have different insights, different journeys, different learning journeys about what it is that the foundation is actually trying to do. And sometimes it takes time for particular board members to come around and actually see the value in the relationship between their foundation and your organization. So there was this one fund that we were working with. I think I worked with them for 3 years. So I applied 3 different times, and the executive director and the program officer committed to what we do. Every single time. Sorry, Samin. Sorry, Samin. Sorry, Samin. And then I don't know what happened the 4th year. By that time, I was feeling a bit dejected. But the 4th year, the 2 board members who were on the fence were the first ones to say they deserve to be funded, right? And so what I'll say again, it's about the relationships. It's kind of shifting perceptions, making things very clear for people who actually have to then go to their boards or go to somebody more senior in their foundation to be able to make the case to support you, so that they can go to somebody more senior to them and make that case for support. And unfortunately, that takes time, right? And why am I sharing this with you all is to let you know, like, all of us have seen rejection, and unfortunately it's part of kind of the nature of fundraising. But the thing is not to take it personally. It's a process, it's a system, and you just have to work it. And as you work it, the more you work it, the better your chances go in hearing back a yes. So if you've been rejected, you still thank the funder and you ask for feedback. I always, always, always do this. I ask the program officer, what was it about the proposal that didn't resonate, right? And sometimes I found that maybe I didn't do such a great job of aligning what it was that they were looking for and what it is that we are doing. Maybe I was too much in my head and it was more jargony and it wasn't made as simple as possible for them to understand, right? I also ask if I can apply in the next grant cycle, right? Sometimes there are these weird restrictions that some funders have where it's like if you applied in the spring cycle, you have to wait until the next spring cycle. You can't do it in the fall cycle or something. So it's good to understand, like, when is the next time you can apply again with that particular funder. And also, this is a great way of kind of staying on their radar, because, like, we live and breathe our organization. So we are constantly on our minds. And it baffles us when we're like, what? You forgot who I am? Because for them, they don't eat, breathe, and sleep our organization, right? They may admire what we do, but they're not going to think about us the same way that we do ourselves. And so ask if you can stay in touch with them. So, like, we have a newsletter. Can I send you our quarterly report? Or can I invite you to events? Or, so that, like, you somehow stay in touch and want to develop that relationship a little more then then just like, hey, give me feedback on a proposal, and thanks so much. I'll see you next grant cycle. All right, I think I'm gonna stop talking, and I did a good job because I stopped 2 minutes before 9 o'clock, and usually I've gone over. But I was hoping for more time for questions from folks. So I'll stop there, and I invite people to ask questions. Thank you. Thank you, Hoda.
While you all are thinking of questions, before I forget, I'm putting a feedback form in the chat. So if you can just take a minute to let us know, what did you think? What could we have done a little different? What did you absolutely love about Samin because she's amazing? And what, was it too long? Was it too short? Whatever. So please take a minute just to click on that and let us know what you thought. And if anybody has questions, go ahead. I know.
This is Shuhana, by the way. I wanted to say that this is the final session that I attended. I missed the other two because I only found out about it, and there has been some confusion. So, but I thought I'd join in anyway and learn a little bit. And I think this is a really good session, Samin. I really appreciate whatever I can get today.
Thank you.
So maybe I'll look into it furthermore and try to learn, and maybe reach out to you at some point. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Yes, and for everyone on the call, like if you have, a question here and there, or just, need someone to share lame jokes with you, give you puns, some words of advice, or like pep talks, I'm definitely here. And definitely on the screen. I'm like, I have to cover my face. But yes, you feel free to email me.
I also wanted to let you all know this is one of the first series that we're doing with her leadership toolbox, and the whole idea behind it is to really empower women with the skills that they need to excel at their nonprofits, at their leadership. And I think a lot of this, to be a part of a training like this would cost a lot of money for everyone. And we're trying to make it accessible because we understand that especially Muslim women have organizations that are not necessarily always well funded. So because funding is what we're trying to get by coming to this organization, we have tried to make it free. And we do encourage you to make a donation to the Muslim Women's Organization so that we can continue providing these trainings, and we are going to make a habit of it. This is one, and one that Samin and I talked about is imposter syndrome. That'll be coming up soon. I think as women leaders, there's so much that we struggle with and so many skills that we need to build. And so stay tuned for all of those. However you learned about this, just keep watching that. It could be our Instagram or Facebook, or if you go on our website, there's our mailing list. We will keep doing these kinds of trainings on a regular basis. And Salwa is on here somewhere, and she is the one who helps manage these. And you should have received emails from Salwa. So just let her know if you want to stay informed about our next training. We will resume the Her Leadership Toolbox after Ramadan, because I know everybody gets busy during Ramadan. So we'll be starting again, a couple months from now. We will be having a green masjid training for anyone that is interested. We're looking to do that during Ramadan, actually, just a environmental, best practices for Muslim organizations when it comes to being sustainable. So that is something Salwa is researching, but we'll let you know when that's coming up, inshallah. But thank you for your feedback. And Samin, thank you so much for your time. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, the videos. So we do have the videos, and what I will be doing is uploading them to YouTube with a private link. So I will, if anybody missed part of it or needs to review some, I will upload them either maybe on Google Drive and share a link with you, but that link will only be active for a certain amount of time before we change the link. We just want to make sure that people are here and participating and understanding what's going on instead of just kind of spreading around this video and watching it without the context. So yay, happy dance. Yeah, that's why we recorded it. Sometimes when you go through it once, you need to kind of go back and hear something again or get some clarification. So we will try to make that available. I'm not sure when, because I have to get it kind of edited and uploaded, but the slides we will be sending out to you soon. You'll just stay on the lookout for an email from Salwa with the slides from all 3 sessions.
I was just going to quickly add that I think celebrating wins are really important, especially when you are fundraising. And so in all my teams that I've been a part of, I've actually asked all my teams, what is the best way for us to celebrate when we get a grant or we get a gift from a corporation or an individual donor? And so there have been variations of the money dance that have happened. So that is something that I encourage everyone to also think about and perhaps incorporate in their fundraising, because it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of work that goes into these relationship building and like kind of like all the back work that you have to do. So I think like it's a good way to kind of appreciate your work within the team dynamics, and then other people also kind of see like why fundraising is so important. So I encourage people to come up with their own ways to celebrate. It doesn't need to be a dance, but it's fun if it is a dance.
I mean, I don't dance.
I know. I also have a soundtrack that I do a lot of things with my teams.
I'll karaoke to it. I'll have a really like happy, excited karaoke session.
Yeah.
But thank you all. If you do have, I shared that email address. So if you do have any questions once you are absorbing all of this amazing information that Samin gave, please do reach out. And we hope to see you soon somewhere, but have a really nice Ramadan. And inshallah, see you again in the near future. Thank you. Thank you, Samin. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Assalamualaikum. Bye-bye.
Walaikum assalam. Amber's still here. Oh, walaikum assalam, Amber. Oh. How are you, Samin? You did it.
Yeah. I can't believe it. It's done.
It's done. It was a lot. It was wonderful.
Yeah. I don't know. My computer crashed twice, so I had to redo the presentation 2 times. I was like, oh, and it didn't save it. I was like, I hate my life.
That's why you need to use Google. You need to
It's
use
recording.